Her family called her a burden. The Alpha King called her his greatest treasure. Alara had always known her place. In her family's grand estate, she was the shadow that followed behind her older siblings, the one whose laughter fell flat, whose clumsiness drew sharp eyes and sharper words. Her mother called her soft. Her father barely noticed her, and her sisters whispered behind her back, their smiles lined with cruelty. "You trip over air itself," her eldest brother sneered one evening as she stumbled over a loose floorboard in the candlelit hall. Her cheeks burned with shame, but she dared not cry. "Not here!" Not in front of them. It was not only shame that made her small, it was fear. Fear of failure, fear of mockery, fear of the darkness that sometimes followed her in dreams, whispering of shadows and curses she could not yet name. She had tried to hide it, as her family demanded. But the gift that made her different also made her afraid. Alara loved the forest. Its quiet gave her a freedom she could not find in the halls of her home. Here, among the twisted oaks and misty hollows, the shadows spoke, and she could hear them. Not voices exactly, but feelings, faint echoes of sorrow, rage, or despair. She could sense when something was broken, when something was not as it should be. She had kept this secret from everyone, fearing they would call her a witch. One evening, as a cold wind swept through the estate, Alara slipped from her room, pulling her cloak tightly around her. Her family's laughter echoed behind her, cruel and sharp, fading as she pressed deeper into the woods. The sun had dipped behind the hills, leaving the forest in twilight, where the trees were black and the air smelled of frost. The wind carried a sound, distant and strange, a low growl, like metal scraping against stone. Alara froze. She had wandered far from the path, into the parts of the forest where few dared to go. Shadows danced around her, longer than they should have been, moving with a will of their own. She pressed her back against a tree and whispered to herself, "It's only the wind. It's only the wind!" But the forest did not answer. A sudden movement caught her eye. A figure stepping from the darkness. Tall, broad, cloaked in black and silver, with eyes that shone like frozen fire. He moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, every step deliberate, every motion commanding. Alara's heart thudded in her chest. "You should not be here," the figure said, his voice deep, resonant, echoing through the trees. It was not unkind, but it carried authority that made her knees weak. I was only walking," she stammered. Her gift flared, and she felt the pull of something wrong, something dangerous. "I didn't mean to!" The man's gaze sharpened, and the shadows around him seemed to shift, twisting like living things. "The forest does not forgive mistakes easily," he said. "And yet you walk unafraid." Alara swallowed. "I am not afraid," she whispered, unsure if she was lying to herself or to him. "You should be," he said, and a faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Few are brave enough to survive the dark woods at this hour." He did not strike her, though her instincts screamed that he could. Instead, he turned, moving deeper into the forest, and the shadows followed him. Something compelled her to follow, though every instinct told her to flee. The figure stopped beside a clearing where the air shimmered with a strange cold light. A creature rose from the mist, its form twisted and jagged, teeth glinting as it hissed. It lunged at him with unnatural speed, and the man moved like water, striking with a blade that gleamed black as night. The clash sent sparks into the air, and Alara's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything like it. The creature snarled. But it did not touch him again. The man moved with strength and precision, but there was exhaustion beneath it, a weight she could feel as if it pressed against the air itself. Finally, with the final swing of his blade, the creature fell, dissolving into shadows that melted into the ground. He turned to her then, and she realized for the first time that she had not blinked, had not moved, had only watched, frozen. "You saw too much," he said. "Not a threat, but a statement. Most would be dead by now. I did not move," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I was afraid, but I could not look away." "Good," he said softly. And then, almost in a whisper, "Your courage is unusual. Elara felt a strange heat in her chest. Something shifted, like a thread connecting her to him, and she felt both terrified and drawn. Who, who are you? She asked. I am Kale, he replied, his gaze piercing. Alpha of this land, protector, prisoner of my own curse. His words were heavy, like a burden too large to bear. And you are not as you seem. I am Elara, she said. Her voice found strength she did not know she possessed. Shadows! They speak to me! Kale's eyes narrowed, studying her. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or surprise, passed across his face. A seer, he said, and the word held weight. Dangerous gift. Elara's heart skipped.
Dangerous? Yes, Kyle said, his voice low. In the wrong hands.
It can be death. In the right hands, it can be power. The forest grew quiet then. The wind stilled as though listening. Elara shivered. I do not want to hurt anyone. He studied her for a long moment. Perhaps you will learn that power cannot always be gentle. Something in her stirred, both fear and fascination. He was not like anyone she had ever met. He was authority and danger all at once, yet beneath it she sensed loneliness, a wound that had not yet healed. You should leave, Kale said at last. Go back to where you belong. But know this, the forest, it does not let go so easily. Elara wanted to run, yet her feet refused. I cannot, not yet. I feel something is coming. Kale's eyes darkened. You feel correctly. Before she could ask more, a distant howl echoed through the trees. The wind carried a stench of decay, and Elara's gift flared violently. Shadows twisted toward the clearing, moving with intent, forming shapes that made her stomach churn. Kale's expression hardened. You must return home, now. If you stay, you will be caught in what is coming. I cannot leave you, she whispered, and the words surprised her even as they left her lips. Then you will see, he said, and without warning he vanished into the shadows, leaving her alone in the mist. Elara stumbled back toward the path, fear and adrenaline colliding inside her. She had only gone a short distance when she reached the outskirts of her village, and froze. Smoke rose in black spirals from the streets. Shouts echoed sharp and panicked. Something was attacking. Her heart pounded. She raced forward, her gift screaming with warnings. The villagers fled, tripping over each other, screaming as shadowed shapes moved with terrifying speed, destroying everything in their path. And then she saw it. Marks burned into the ground, strange and jagged, the same marks she had glimpsed on Kale's blade. Her throat went dry. Her village, her home, was under attack by something connected to him. Elara's hands trembled. The shadows around her whispered in fear and warning. She realized with a sinking heart that she was no longer safe. That whatever darkness had touched this land had now touched her, and that her life was forever entwined with the Alpha King she had only just met. And somewhere in the heart of the forest, Kale watched, silent and unreadable, knowing that the threads of fate had begun to twist in ways neither of them could yet understand. Elara took a deep breath. She would not run. She would not hide. She had been called a burden her entire life, but perhaps in the shadows of this night, she was about to discover her true purpose. The forest waited. The night waited, and destiny, cold and unyielding, had begun its long, dark work. The first time Elara saw the fortress up close, she thought it was carved from ice. The walls rose like black glass from the jagged cliffs, spires clawing at the clouds. A cold wind whipped around her, carrying the sharp scent of stone, iron, and something older, something that smelled of power and danger. Kale stood at the gate, tall and still, like a statue of winter. His eyes, frozen and sharp, met hers immediately. They had not spoken since the night in the forest, yet the memory of his presence lingered, as if the forest itself had pressed him into her mind. "You came," he said, his voice low, calm, but threaded with authority.
I, Elara faltered.
She had expected anger or accusation, but he simply observed her, as if weighing her soul. "I didn't know."
I thought, her words tangled in the cold wind.
You thought what?
Cale asked, stepping aside. The gates opened silently, revealing halls that glimmered faintly in the icy moonlight, corridors that smelled of iron and old stone, and shadows that seemed to move with their own will. I didn't mean to follow you, she admitted. I wanted to understand. Cale's lips pressed into a thin line. Curiosity can be dangerous. He looked past her to the snow-swept courtyard. You have power, Elara, a dangerous kind. You must learn to control it, or it will control you. Elara swallowed, her gift pulsing like a drumbeat in her mind. She had always felt the shadows, the faint cries of broken things, but she had never touched a power like Cale's. Here she felt it twisting around her, calling to her, and she was both afraid and strangely drawn. I don't know how, she admitted. I can feel things. Shadows, they speak to me. But I don't know how to make them stop. Cale's gaze softened for the briefest moment, a crack in the icy wall he wore. Then you will learn, he said. I will teach you. Not out of kindness, but necessity. Darkness is rising, and you will need strength to survive it. Elara followed him into the fortress, her boots echoing on the cold stone floors. The halls seemed alive, the torches flickering even though there was no wind, the shadows stretching toward her as though curious, or perhaps hungry. You will sleep here, Cale said, motioning toward a small chamber lined with soft furs. And you will not leave without permission. The forest and the enemies that dwell within it will not forgive mistakes. Elara nodded, though her heart raced. I understand. Cale paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her shiver. Do you, or do you only think you understand? Before she could answer, a sudden clatter echoed through the hall. Cale's posture shifted instantly, alert, dangerous, commanding. He moved toward the sound and Elara followed, hesitating. He turned his head slightly. Stay close. But do not interfere. Through a twisting corridor they reached a hall where two guards were struggling with a shadow creature, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Cale moved like a storm. One swift motion of his blade and the shadow recoiled, hissing like burning ice. Another strike, and it dissipated into a cloud of dark mist. Elara watched, breathless. How? How do you do that? Cale did not answer immediately. He sheathed his blade and looked at her, his expression unreadable. Discipline. Strength! And understanding the cost of power. If you wield it without respect, it will destroy you. She shivered. His eyes seemed to look past her, through her, to the shadows that clung to her own gift. And if I fail? She asked softly. Cale's jaw tightened. Then you will be consumed. Or worse, you will become a weapon for the darkness. The weight of his words pressed on her chest. She had spent her life feeling weak and unimportant, but now she realized she held a power that could shape life and death. It frightened her, but it also made her feel alive. The days that followed were a relentless blur of lessons, both physical and mystical. Cale pushed her hard, teaching her to sense the shadows, to touch the lingering curses in objects and creatures. At first, she faltered, her mind a storm of fear and doubt. But Cale's presence, though commanding, had an odd steadiness. When she faltered, he would not scold. He would simply say, "Try again," his voice low, patient, and something in her chest stirred at the sound. She began to see cracks in him, too. When he thought she was not looking, his shoulders would slump, his eyes would soften, and for a fleeting moment he seemed almost human, vulnerable under the weight of his crown and curse. Those moments made her heart ache in a way she did not understand. One evening, the fortress was quiet. Snow fell outside the high windows, blanketing the cliffs in silver. Alara had been practicing alone, her hands tracing patterns in the air as shadows of light and dark shifted around her. Suddenly, Kale appeared behind her. "You are stronger than I expected," he said, watching her carefully.
I think I'm learning,
She admitted.
but I am afraid.
Afraid of the shadows, afraid of... you. Her cheeks burned. She hadn't meant to speak the last part, but it slipped out. Kale's gaze locked on hers, and for a heartbeat, the cold edge of his presence softened. "Afraid of me?" he repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "You... I am not kind. I am not safe." "I know," she said, "and yet I feel drawn to you." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread. He did not respond immediately. Then slowly he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the cold aura radiating from him. "Do not misunderstand," he said finally. I cannot promise safety, but I will not harm you. If you survive this, you may even understand me." Alara's breath caught. There was danger in his words, and yet a strange warmth under the frost. She realized with a mixture of fear and fascination that she had never felt this way about anyone or anything. That night, the fortress shook, not with wind or snow, but with an unnatural tremor. Alara awoke to the sounds of stone grinding, doors rattling, and a low, growling voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Kyle appeared instantly, as if summoned by instinct. His expression was sharp, alert, deadly. "The shadows are restless," he said. "You must come with me." They ran through halls that seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows gathering around them, twisting into forms too strange and terrible to name. Alara's gift flared uncontrollably. She could feel the fear, the hunger, and the anger in the darkness, and it terrified her. Kale moved beside her, his presence a shield. "Focus!" he commanded. "You must control it. Control yourself, or it will control you." Her hands trembled as she reached out, trying to shape the shadows, calm them. And then, in a sudden surge, her energy and Kale's power collided, merging in a way that neither of them had expected. The shadows froze, the fortress fell silent. For a heartbeat, there was a strange, almost magical stillness. Then the ground shook, the air thickened, and Kale stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden force of their shared energy. "Alara!" he barked, steadying himself. His eyes were wide, part alarm, part awe. "Do you understand what you've done?" I don't know," she cried, fear and excitement warring inside her. "I just tried to help." Kale's jaw tightened. "You have changed something fundamental. Something I have protected for years. You may have saved us, or you may have doomed us both."
Alara felt her heart pound. She had always believed herself weak, a burden in her family's eyes.
But now, in this frozen fortress, standing beside a man she feared and admired, she realized she held a power no one had ever seen, and it terrified her. Kale looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her chest tighten, a mix of respect, fear, and something else she could not name. "We are bound now," he said quietly, "by this power, by fate, by the shadows. And if we are to survive what is coming, you must trust me." Alara nodded, though the words felt heavy on her tongue. I will try." Kale's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, and he said, "Good. You will need every ounce of strength, and so will I." Outside, the wind howled across the cliffs, carrying whispers of the coming darkness. Inside, Alara felt a spark of something she had never felt before. Fear, yes, but also the first stirrings of purpose. She was no longer merely a burden. She was a part of something greater, something dangerous, and something that might just change both their lives forever. The fortress doors trembled as the shadows pressed closer, and Cale tightened his grip on his blade. Elara clenched her hands, feeling her gift pulse in rhythm with the storm around them. They would face the night together. Whether they survived or fell, they were no longer alone. And somewhere, in the cold, black towers above, the Alpha King and the girl he had saved from the forest both knew nothing would ever be the same. The wind was colder here than anything Elara had ever known. Snow blanketed the cliffs and valleys in white, and the sky hung heavy with clouds, gray and endless. She had lost count of the days since the shadows attacked her village, since Cale had taken her to the fortress, since their powers had collided in a surge of energy she still could not fully understand. They were in exile now. The fortress, magnificent and terrible, had become a beacon for dark forces drawn to their power. Cale had no choice but to flee, taking her through forests thick with frost and mountains jagged as broken teeth. Each step was a test, each night a battle to survive the creatures that hunted them. Elara walked beside him, her breath misting in the icy air. Her hands were raw from shaping shadows, her mind still aching from the bond they had formed. Cale had saved her countless times, yet he was not infallible. She had begun to understand what it meant to carry power, and to feel the weight of responsibility, not just for herself, but for someone else. "You are stronger than I believed," Cale said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. They were crossing a narrow mountain pass, the cliffs on either side sheer and black. The snow whipped against their cloaks, and the wind tugged at Elara's hair. "I am learning," she admitted. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "But I am still afraid." "Good," he said sharply, though there was no anger in his tone. "Fear is what keeps you alive. Courage without caution is nothing but a fool's end." Elara studied him. Cale had always been fearsome, but here, in exile, he seemed human. Vulnerable even, though he would never admit it. And somehow, that made him even more terrifying. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer comfort, but she knew she could not. He carried too much weight, too many burdens. The days bled into one another as they traveled through lands abandoned by men. Villages lay in ruins, forests twisted and dark, rivers frozen and silent. Elara could sense the lingering curses in everything, the pain of broken lives, the anger of spirits left untended, the despair that clung to the land like frost. And every time she reached out, Cale guided her, steadying her gift, teaching her to focus. "You must learn to control it," he said one evening as they sheltered in a cave lit by a single flickering torch. "If you let it run wild, you will destroy yourself." "And me." Elara nodded.
I will try.
I don't want to fail you." Cale's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm.
You cannot fail me.
"You can only fail yourself." And even then, he trailed off, staring into the fire as if weighing some distant thought. The fire crackled, and Elara felt the warmth, both real and strange. She realized she had never been so close to anyone before. Not like this. He was not like her family. He did not mock her, he did not treat her as weak. And yet, he was dangerous, untouchable in ways she could not hope to understand. That night, as snow fell quietly outside their cave, Elara dreamed of shadows rising from the frozen earth, twisting into shapes she recognized. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. Cale was already awake, sitting silently by the fire, watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce through the dark. "You saw them," he said softly. Yes," she whispered. "They were alive, in my dream." "Your gift is strong," Cale said. "Stronger than I anticipated. But strength is useless without control."
"You must learn to bind it." "I will," she said, her voice trembling, though a spark of determination lit her chest.
"I want to help. I want to protect you." Cale's gaze lingered on her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "Perhaps you already do." Their journey continued, the bond between them deepening in ways neither fully understood. Alara's fear had not vanished, but it was tempered by trust, a fragile trust built slowly, moment by moment, and Cale, who had always been alone, began to feel the weight of that trust as something precious, something dangerous, something he could not let go. But exile was not safe, and danger lurked in the form of the familiar. A messenger arrived one dawn, a figure cloaked in gray and silence bearing news that cut through the cold air like a knife. "There is betrayal," the messenger said simply. "Someone you trust has turned against you." Cale's hand went to the hilt of his blade, his eyes narrowing. "Name them," he demanded. The messenger hesitated and then spoke. "It is someone from your fortress. Someone who knew of the girl's power and your weakness." Alara's chest tightened. Traitor?" she asked, her voice small. Cale's jaw set. "Yes, and they will come for you. For us, if we do not act first." The next hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Cale moved with precision, his commands sharp and efficient, yet he included her in every step. Ellora's hands shook, but she learned quickly, shaping shadows to shield them, using her gift to sense approaching danger. Each movement made her feel alive, but exhausted in a way that left her trembling. That night, under the pale light of the frozen moon, the traitor struck. Alara had sensed him first. A familiar presence, once trusted, now twisted with envy and ambition.
He moved like a shadow, silent, cruel, and deadly.
Elara! Behind me!
Cale barked, and she obeyed instantly, her heart hammering in her chest.
The shadows around them flared in response, moving with her will, forming walls of protection. The traitor laughed, a sound bitter and hollow. "You cannot hide forever, Alpha. The girl is mine!" Cale stepped forward, blade drawn, and the fight began. It was chaos, steel clashing, shadows dancing, the cold wind whipping like a living thing. Alara focused, drawing on everything Cale had taught her. The shadows obeyed her, striking at the intruder, forcing him back. But then, in a sudden moment, the traitor lunged, not at her, but at Cale. Time slowed. Alara tried to push the shadows to shield him, but it was too fast, too sudden. The blade struck, and Cale staggered, a hand pressed to his side, his breath sharp and pained. "Alara!" he shouted, and something inside her snapped. Her gift exploded outward in a wave of energy, the shadows responding to her panic and fury. The traitor was thrown back, the wind howling like a storm. Cale fell to one knee, his face pale but alive. Alara rushed to him, her hands trembling as she reached for his arm. "Cale! Are you hurt?" "I am, fine," he gasped, though the pain in his eyes betrayed the words. "But we are not safe yet." I almost lost you." Cale's gaze met hers, intense and unreadable. "You may have," he said quietly.
But you did not. You
"Saved us both." Alara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, fierce and terrifying. For the first time, she realized that her fear, her gift, her very being mattered, to him and perhaps to herself as well. The traitor had been defeated, for now. But the bond between them, forged in exile and danger, had deepened beyond anything either could have predicted. Alara saw in Cale not just the Alpha King, the warrior, but the man who carried burdens too heavy to name, and she felt the stirrings of something she had never known. Care, connection, and a longing that made her chest ache.
And yet, as they looked out over the frozen mountains, they both knew the danger was far from over.
The traitor's ambitions were only one thread in a tapestry of darkness, and their enemies were many. Alara shivered in the wind, though her eyes were bright. We will face it," she said softly. "Together." Cale's gaze softened for a moment, a rare crack in the stoic armor he wore. "Yes," he said quietly. "Together, for now." But even as the words left his lips, a shadow moved far in the distance, silent, patient, and watching. And somewhere in the cold night the wind carried a whisper, a promise that the trials had only begun. Elara and Kale would survive this night. They would survive each other. But the next wave of darkness would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. And when it came, they would have no choice but to fight or be consumed. The mountains were silent again, save for the wind and the distant cries of creatures that lurked in the dark. Elara stood beside Kale, feeling the bond between them pulse like a heartbeat. She had always believed herself weak, a burden, but now she knew she carried something greater, something powerful and dangerous, and capable of changing everything. The snow fell heavier, as if the sky itself mourned or warned. And in the shadows, far beyond their sight, something stirred, something that would not rest until both the Alpha King and the girl who had saved him were brought to heel. The sun had barely risen, and its pale light fell across the frozen plains, painting the snow with shades of silver and gray. Elara's fingers itched with the energy that had been growing inside her for weeks, a combination of fear, determination, and the strange binding power she shared with Kale. They had returned to the kingdom, once grand and now scarred by war and shadows. Villages lay in ruin, forests twisted and rivers frozen where the water once sang. The people who survived whispered of the Alpha King and the girl who had come from nowhere, saving some, frightening others. Kale walked beside her, silent, his expression unreadable. The wounds from the traitor's attack had not fully healed, but he hid the pain behind his usual cold mask. Elara had grown accustomed to seeing him this way, the mask hiding both his sorrow and the weight of his crown. "You are quiet," he said finally, breaking the chill silence. His voice, low and steady, carried across the frozen plain. "I am thinking," she replied softly.
About everything. About the shadows, the traitor, the people.
"And about you." Kale's gaze flicked to her, sharp but unreadable. "And?" Elara took a deep breath. "And I don't know how I should feel."
I am.
"But I am not afraid to stand with you." For a moment, Kale said nothing. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Good." "Fear without courage is useless. Courage without understanding is reckless. You understand more than you realize." They approached the capital, now a city of frost and silence. The streets were empty, and the tall towers of the king's castle loomed above like black teeth against the gray sky. Yet something in the air told Elara that the greatest danger had not yet arrived. "They know we are coming," Kale said, his voice low. "The darkness will not wait for us to be ready." It never does. Elara tightened her cloak around her shoulders, her gift thrumming like a heartbeat beneath her skin. "Then we will face it," she said. "Together." Kale's eyes softened briefly.
Yes, together.
As they entered the castle gates, shadows shifted unnaturally. Elara's gift flared, sensing the lingering curses in the stone, the fear and anger of those who had died or been driven away. She reached out instinctively, shaping the shadows into protective forms. Kale watched silently, his presence steady, guiding her hand when the shadows wavered. They moved through the halls, and finally they reached the throne room. It was empty, silent, but the air pulsed with a dark energy that made the hair on Elara's neck rise. A figure emerged from the shadows, a being of twisted darkness, far more powerful than any they had faced before. Its form was fluid, shifting, impossible to fully see, yet its eyes glowed with malice. "Alpha King!" the creature hissed, its voice echoing as if coming from every corner at once. "And the girl! You cannot hope to survive!" Kale stepped forward, blade drawn, his aura flaring with power. "We do not hope, we endure. And we protect what must live." Elara's heart pounded, but she did not step back. Instead, she let her gift flow through her, calling on the shadows she had learned to command. The creature recoiled slightly, surprised by the strength emanating from her. "You are strong," it said, voice laced with venom. "But strength alone cannot stop me." "We are more than strength," Kale said, his voice low, commanding.
We are bound. Together we are more than you can destroy. The battle began. Shadows and light clashed in the throne room, echoing off the high walls. The creature lashed out, but Alara's power formed barriers, her control over the shadows protecting both herself and Kale. They moved in perfect synchrony, a dance of trust and power honed through weeks of exile and training. At one moment, the creature lunged at Kale faster than thought. Alara's hands shot out instinctively, forming a wall of shadows that absorbed the blow. The force knocked her to the ground, but she forced herself to rise. She could feel Kale's strength beside her, steadying her, guiding her. "You are more than a burden," Kale said suddenly, his voice strong, carrying through the chaos. "You are my greatest treasure." The words struck her like lightning. She froze for a heartbeat, disbelief and awe mixing inside her. She had always thought herself worthless, a shadow in her own family's eyes. But here, in the midst of danger, the Alpha King, the man whose presence had terrified and fascinated her, called her a treasure. The creature screeched, breaking her moment of wonder. Alara shook herself free and focused, pouring every ounce of energy into the shadows. They rose like a tide, swirling, powerful, unbroken. Kale moved alongside her, his own energy combining with hers in a rhythm that neither fully understood but both felt. The shadows converged on the creature, binding it, holding it in place. Alara reached out with her mind, pushing, shaping, controlling. Slowly the creature began to dissolve, its dark energy breaking apart like ice under sunlight. With one final surge, it vanished, leaving only silence and the faint smell of smoke and frost. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted, her gift spent. Kale dropped beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said simply. I did it?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. Kale nodded, his eyes meeting hers with something softer, something she had never seen before. "Together we did it. Alone, perhaps neither of us would have survived." They stood, side by side, the cold wind carrying away the remnants of the battle. The throne room, once filled with dark energy, now felt empty, peaceful. And in that quiet, Alara felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Pride, courage, strength. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not mocked, not dismissed, not invisible. Kale's eyes held the acknowledgement she had craved for so long. "You were called a burden," Kale said softly, his hand brushing against hers.
But you are everything.
"My treasure, the one I could not protect if I were alone."
Alara's chest swelled with emotion. Tears threatened, but she held them back, letting the warmth of his words and the reality of their bond wash over her.
I never imagined that I could mean so much to someone," she whispered.
You always did, Kale said.
"You just didn't know it." Outside, the kingdom began to stir. The people who survived watched the throne room, sensing the shift. The darkness that had threatened their land had been broken, not by one, but by two. Bound by trust, courage, and the bond of shared struggle, Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, almost gently, he said, "We must rebuild, not just the kingdom, but ourselves."
"And the world we will protect together,"
Alara nodded. "Yes, together." For a long moment they stood in silence, the wind whistling around the towers, carrying away the last whispers of shadow and fear. She looked at him, the man who had once been untouchable, cold and distant, and she saw the man who had learned to trust, who had learned to care, who had found strength in the presence of someone he had once thought weak. Kale's hand found hers again, their fingers intertwining. "You are my burden," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And yet, you are the greatest thing I have ever known." Alara smiled, a mixture of relief, joy, and awe. "I am not a burden," she said softly. "I am yours, and yours alone." The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the frost-covered kingdom. The shadows had gone, the darkness had been defeated, and the bond between them, tempered by trials, strengthened by danger, and forged in trust, was unbreakable. For the first time, Alara felt truly free. She had survived her family's cruelty, the threats of enemies, and the fears within herself. She had faced darkness, and in doing so she had discovered her own power, her courage, and her worth. Kale, once bound by his curse and his throne, had found something equally precious. Someone who could see him, truly see him, and stand beside him, unafraid. And together they stepped forward into a world that was still scarred, still uncertain, but no longer ruled by fear. They had survived the shadows, and now they could shape the light. Alara's heart swelled with the knowledge that her journey had only just begun. But for the first time she knew she was not alone. She was treasured. She was strong. And she was exactly where she belonged. The wind carried their laughter across the frozen plains, a sound that promised hope, courage, and love. And the world, for all its darkness, seemed to listen.